Psychologists, what's the most interesting mental disorder you've encountered? Capgras delusion. The patient is convinced that a family member has been replaced by an imposter who is completely identical. For example, the patient will tell you the person sitting across from them looks exactly like their spouse, sounds exactly like their spouse, has all the memories of their spouse, but that's not actually my spouse, and the patient oftentimes isn't overly distressed by this imposter. In 20 years I've only seen the condition twice. A psychologist here, not someone I worked with, but I did observe someone with alien hand syndrome. The patient's left hand would stroke her hair and pat her face, but was not under her control. Each episode would last for about 20 minutes. Turned out the cause was a tumor. Amazingly, it didn't seem to cause her any distress. Early on in my career I worked at a planned community that functioned as a partial hospitalization program. One of the residents would bring magazines and newspapers he'd found to the main office door every day. Sometimes he'd be upset, sometimes overjoyed, depending on the stories, because all of them were about him. I've never worked with someone with such delusions before or since. One day he was Michael Jordan offering to buy us cars. The next he was Osama bin Laden trying to hide with us. He'd read his obituary. His wife cheated on him in a political scandal. He'd surveyed the Congo. We restricted and sorted his mail after the bin Laden incident, but he'd find other residents or in the community. Mental health counselor here. The interesting one is schizophrenia with visual hallucinations. Most people with schizophrenia have auditory hallucinations. I did not realize how much more unsettling the visual one is. The client I had with this disorder used to see me and other people he knew. He called me up yelling at me for coming into his apartment early in the morning, even if I told him otherwise. The experience of seeing me is very real to him. I can't imagine seeing people in my own home, especially at night. That would freak me the hell out. Social worker here. Used to work at a psych hospital. Saw a form of OCD where the patient could not let go of anything she came across or made. Leaves, sticks, tampons, pads, poop, some stored Tupperware, some, most, hidden where her feet went in her bed. We would routinely have to go through her room and get everything removed. I don't remember how she did in treatment, but I remember that she was a teenager and felt terrible that that's what she was dealing with. Never saw a patient with it, but I'm a nurse, and in the electronic medical record we use, walking corpse syndrome is always at the top of the diagnosis choice list. Apparently it's when you're convinced that you're dead. Never understood why it was the top of the list. Pain conversion disorder. I had an ex-girlfriend that was in a wheelchair, but her parents and doctor said she could walk, but her legs won't let her. Her parents said she may have woken up during a surgery she had when she was a kid, because it all started after that surgery. She even went to physical therapy for it 4 years and she might still do that, I don't know, but she could move around without the chair kind of, but she couldn't walk, so it was almost a disability, but not fully. Very confusing. She was super middle hot though, and the coolest girl I ever dated. Doctor training to be a psychiatrist here. Had a patient recently who was convinced he had fathered a child. He hadn't. He got in trouble because he would go to this kid's school to try to contact him. Parents were understandably upset and had never had any contact with patient previously. Patient believed that Stephen Hawking had inseminated the mother with the patient's sperm by some sort of telepathic process he couldn't explain. Truly bizarre, and so far hasn't really gained insight with treatment. He gets very emotional thinking about his son. Still works full time though, and in many respects, leads a normal life. Amazing. I don't technically qualify as I'm not a psychologist or doctor, but I was a support worker, and one case I had was a boy with PANDAS syndrome. It basically manifests as severe OCD. It can completely alter the personality in the child. This kid wouldn't leave his room, to the point he would just urinate on the carpet. He would scream obscenities to hit parents for no reason. This is actually caused by having strep throat, except the bacterial infection doesn't go away, and it can turn into PANDAS, and the treatment is most often just a very specific antibiotic. But the children often need therapy to deal with the aftermath. Their personality goes back to normal, but it's very upsetting to go through. medical doctor working in an inpatient psychiatric facility. We had a psychotic patient with visual hallucinations who saw colored dots all around him during episodes of distress. The great thing about it was he told us he was able to blow the colored dots away. We encouraged him to do it as it seemed to greatly reduce anxiety. My friend has complex regional pain syndrome. She experiences non-psychogenic hallucinations as a part of that pathology. She's completely aware that they are hallucinations and has no psychosis. She sees white tigers, angels and demons. The white tigers apparently have a thick and luxuriant fur that is wonderful to touch. It's a horrible condition, but that aspect of it she really likes. Worked in a youth treatment center. Worked with a really stupid sociopath. Honestly, it was super funny. Sadly, in the unit beside us was a high-functioning sociopath who's convinced a dude to murder a couple. Also worked with a dude who was a diagnosed pathological liar. Pseudologica fantastica. More than a few other interesting diagnoses, but some crazy individual stories. Inpatient psychiatrist here. I love my job because every case is interesting in its own way and I'm never bored. One story that comes to mind is that we had this cute little old white lady with psychosis who was absolutely convinced that she was having an affair with Ricky Martin, and she would spend rounds casually telling us all about their supposed intimate escapades together in this totally nonchalant and deadpan tone. At one point, in an attempt to prove that Ricky was indeed her lover, she walked up to us in the hallway and tried to hand us her used panties for testing. It took all of our willpower to stay professional, but I'd be lying if I said that we didn't blast live-in lava DeLuca in our offices that week. Psychologist here. Interesting to see so many people in this thread using medicalized jargon. I'm based in the UK, and there's a real hesitance to use the word disorder among clinical psychologists due to the lack of evidence for mental disorders as constructs and the stigma. This thread is talking about people with mental health challenges as if they are rare Pokemon cards. Derealization/depersonalization disorder. Everything is different. Everything is the same. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. People didn't even knew before that nothing which has changed even existed in the first place. It's like when you repeat a name 30 times and it completely changes everything while, in its essence, staying the same. But not with a name. With everything around you. With yourself. That what you call your life and everything that ever happened or will happen in all of existence at the same time. This feels like the opening of Pandora's box. You feel like you always knew this, and this is a higher truth which could probably bring lasting peace and love, but nobody would understand, yourself included. Also at the same time, you feel like you have to hold on to what you were before, for not to die or go insane, and never be able to feel again, or control anything. Some philosophers say it's the ego watching itself die by headshot while it's still fully awake, not having practiced meditation or similar things for years, and not having accumulated enough love and trust to let it die slowly, which causes an ongoing fight between the glimpse of enlightenment and the fully conscious ego watching itself die, trying to protect itself. A possible explanation for this happening, while there is an immediate threat, is that the body decides to do this for the person to be able to continue in a situation you couldn't handle with a functioning ego. Freak accidents etc. Then it's not called a disorder, because it is most often short-term. Long-term, it could be that this happens for a similar reason. The body trying to protect itself from the source of ongoing heavy stress, most often your ego and everything in relation to it, and therefore shutting it down. Delusional disorder is super interesting to me. I've seen people who present as high functional and well educated. You would have no idea they are suffering from such a condition without speaking to them, because delusional disorder doesn't involve the behavioral abnormalities or hallucinations. There may be minor ones, but they are consistent with delusions that schizophrenia or other psychoses do. A conversation can start out very normal, then all of a sudden it's government mind control and alien invasions. It's really hard to keep composure if you don't know they suffer from this beforehand, because it just comes out of nowhere. I worked as counselor in corrections. Meth-induced psychosis. It's as scary as it sounds. I saw several clients' mental health rapidly decline due to meth use. Some developed paranoia, hallucinations, or unpredictable behavior. When I swept through the city I worked in, the downward spiral of some of my clients was devastating. A man I had worked with for over a year went from being sober and reconnecting with his children to being certain that the "feds were out to get him." His demeanor completely changed after his use of ice, and he was impossible to understand, was incoherent, and violent even while sober. It's like the meth broke his brain. He was such a sweet man prior to it, and I think he had a shot at a real future. Unfortunately, he committed suicide while high. That everybody who you have ever seen as completely bonkers had a reality that they believed was just as real as yours. That the computers in the neighbor's basement that were controlling his thoughts were just as real as her roses. You don't question those roses, do you? Are those roses real? Of course they are. You can see them, smell them, everyone else can see them, right? And that reality is so real and so fractured. Sometimes those are roses, right? I remember my grandmother loved every one of them. I remember what they smelled like. I remember the feeling of the thorns in my hands. And now I know that my grandmother never kept roses. I have asked family, no, that was not a reality that they shared. You have no idea how real your reality is until it isn't. I'm a licensed psychologist now, but before I went to graduate school, I worked in an inpatient mental health hospital on adult and adolescent units. I would say the most interesting two disorders I've seen are dissociative fugue and conversion disorder. I saw both while I was there. Dissociative fugue is a condition where someone can wake up one day and believe they are a different person for a short time. My experience was a man who woke up and drove his car from his home until it ran out of gas, which happened to be in my city. He had no identification with him and didn't remember his name, family, or any details of his life. After a short stay in the hospital and some medication, he remembered everything and had a family member pick him up and monitor him for a while, but he still had to put gas in the car, which had been towed to the hospital parking lot. Conversion disorder is characterized by the individual losing the ability to do something, for instance, walking, seeing, talking, and believing that has a biological component. In reality, it's a response to significant trauma and is dissociative in nature. A woman in the hospital manifested the symptom of losing her ability to walk. While she was in the hospital, there was no reason as to why she wasn't able to walk. She came in walking, was unable to ambulate while there, and left walking again.